back to La Belle Vie. Today I'm revisiting the Dan Markel case. And as we get closer, hopefully, to Charlie Adelson's October trial, I wanted to go back through some of the witnesses that I believe will testify at trial, but view them in the light of this case. So up until now, the cases have centered around the gunman, the middle woman. Now we have a case regarding the alleged mastermind, the person who is alleged to have started the ball rolling and hired the hit on Dan Markel. We will still have witnesses testify to things we've heard before, of course. For example, the state will need to prove that a murder occurred, and they will need to prove the premeditation aspect, because these are still elements of first-degree murder, for which is one of the charges that Charlie is facing. But in this trial, I believe we will see much more evidence that focuses on Charlie's role in this whole crime. So this is going to be a series that I'm going to call Countdown to Trial. And of course, we're going to have some obvious folks that will testify that I will cover. People like Detective Isom, retired Detective Isom, Special Agent Patrick Sanford, Sergeant Chris Corbett, and I expect all of them to play a major role in Charlie's case. But I think other witnesses we've seen before are going to play a larger role for this particular case. For example, Jeffrey Lacasse, but there are others. So I'm going to start my series with some of these latter folks and then work my way up to folks like Detective Isom, etc. So today we're going to start with two witnesses, both who appeared in the first and second trials, and they are Marcia Rodriguez and Mary Hull. Now, Marcia Rodriguez, she didn't have a lot of testimony in the first two trials, but basically she was a digital forensic investigator with the Tallahassee Police Department, or I'll refer to them now, it's called TPD. She evaluated Wendy Adelson's phone.
And approximately how many electronic devices have you extracted information off of?
I've worked on over 1,000 phones.
Okay. And do you use different kind of programs to extract that data?
Yes, ma'am.
What types of programs do you use?
The primary program that we use is Celebrite. We use a couple other ones, but that is our primary tool.
And you trained on how to use that tool?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Did you perform a digital extraction or a Celebrite on a phone belonging to Wendy Adelson?
Yes, ma'am.
And do you recall what type of phone that was?
It was an iPhone 4. Apple.
Apple iPhone 4?
Yes, ma'am.
When you perform a Celebrite extraction on a phone, does it change any of the contents inside of the phone itself?
No, ma'am, it does not.
Okay. Why would you do a Celebrite extraction rather than just looking through the phone?
So one of the things that we do is we make sure that we don't alter the device that we get. We try and keep it in the state that it's originally found in. And so if we manipulate and kind of flip through pictures and text messages, stuff like that, we may change something. Also, one of the things that we use a forensic tool for is so that we may, if something's been deleted, if something's, there's a hidden file that the user can't see or they've hidden from view, we may not see it. So we use these tools, and sometimes the tools are able to gather that information for us.
When you do the extraction using Celebrite, does it basically spit out like a PDF report that you can then flip through and look at to see what was contained in the phone?
We use the software that you use to do the processing analysis of the raw data that comes from the phone. It gives the opportunity to create a report. Yes, ma'am.
A Celebrite report.
A Celebrite extraction report. Yes, ma'am.
And that extraction report categorizes different things. For example, puts all the call logs in one section, all of the text messages in one section, and so forth.
Yes, ma'am, it categorizes it.
Okay. And you can also pull out the contact list. Like if I have phone numbers saved in my phone, like my husband or my mother, it would show up the contact name and then the phone number associated with that contact.
Yes, ma'am. How is it entered in the phone? Yes, ma'am.
Now, I think she evaluated more than Wendy's Adelson's phone. We saw in some sidebars that it looked like she had also evaluated Sigfredo Garcia's phone. but none of that actually came up. So the only thing that came up in the 19 and the 22 trials was what I'm going to talk about here. And specifically, in the 19 trial, the state introduced the Celebrate report for Wendy Adelson's phone as identification. So if you recall from other famous trials we've seen, I mean, this was a huge portion of the Murdaugh trial. The Celebrate report is basically the software that Celebrate program uses to basically funnel through this like tons and tons of data that comes off of the phone. And it's basically raw data. It's a ton of raw data. Now, all of that did not get into the trial because, as Chris DeCoste rightly objected to that whole thing coming in on hearsay grounds.
May I approach, Your Honor?
You bet.
Showing you what I previously shown defense counsel. My mark for identification is State's Exhibit 126. Do you recognize what that item is?
Yes, ma'am, this is the disc that I placed, the report that I created, the Celebrate report for Ms. Adelson from.
And that is an accurate Celebrate report directly from Wendy Adelson's iPhone?
Yes, ma'am.
You didn't make any changes to it?
No, ma'am.
And do you recognize that disc because you initialed it underneath the pretty label that we put on top?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, this time I'd offer State's Exhibit 126.
Is there objection?
Yes, Your Honor. Sidebar.
Okay.
So the entire thing did not come in. So right now I'm going to insert in here an expert from the 19 testimony, the actual transcript from the trial, and show you kind of what did get in. So we'll insert that now. So here is the sidebar for these two texts that I was talking about here. So they go to sidebar, and the state is saying this is all relevant. It shows state of mind. I'm not trying to admit it for the truth of the matter asserted, which would be hearsay, but statement of intent, state of mind. You know, for example, with the mechanic, I'm going to pay for this for her. I'm going to pay for this for her shows his intent. So DeCoste responds and says, the state of mind of people that are not testifying in this trials, Charles Adelson and Sully, are not relevant. More importantly, they absolutely are being entered for the truth of the matter asserted, and finally it denies us the ability to confront these witnesses, which is true. Now, of course, in the next trial for Charlie will be the party opponent. And then the state talks about the second email exchange they're trying to get in, with text exchange, excuse me, about the going to Key West. And so this is where he says, for example, the one text thread about going to Key West, he says, I'm going to Key West this weekend. And we have bank records showing he made a whole bunch of payments in Key West. That's being offered to show future conduct. And then DeCoste says, so it's being offered for the truth of the matter. And because both Charlie Adelson and Sully were not party, to the case, they weren't a party statement of a party opponent. They really weren't relevant. So the court agreed, and they went ahead and denied those two text messages. And of course, then the bench conference was concluded. So they just introduced the contacts, the call log for the day of the murder, and the voicemail log. They did not try again to get in that entire Celebrate report. So now we've got Charlie Adelson's case. Now, again, I think we're going to see Ms. Rodriguez again, but I think in this trial we're going to see more about what work she did. Because again, I don't think she just looked at Wendy Adelson's phone. I am really curious, though, about the analysis of Wendy's phone and her computer. Now, the Charlie information, to the extent that any of the information on those devices of Wendy's relate to Charlie, they'll likely be able to get most of that in as a statement of a party opponent. Now, for anything else, it doesn't mean that it won't get in. It just means that for each particular item of evidence, the state's going to have to show that one, either it's not hearsay under Florida law, or it can be allowed in as an exception to the hearsay rule. We could do an entire hour or more on hearsay. We're not going to do that. But, we can go into some of that when the trial actually comes about. But in any event, we know the Celebrate report is going to have tons of information, and I'm super curious what's going to come out in this trial of the work that Marcia Rodriguez did on all of that digital evidence, right? That is one of the first witnesses from the earlier trials that I expect to see again, and I expect to see more information from her. I think she's going to have more of a role to play now that we have an Adelson involved. Okay, so the second witness that I'm going to talk about today is Mary Hull. Now, Mary Hull testified pretty extensively on both trials. At the time of her involvement in the case, she was with the Department of Financial Services in the Office of Financial Integrity. And her role at that time, when she was working on the matter in 2016, was she was a criminal financial investigator. Now, today, she's no longer in that role. She's actually working for the U.S. Attorney's Office in Tampa as a financial investigator as well. Basically, in layman's terms, she's a forensic accounting expert. Okay, so she's looking into the money. So her task, as she testified to in the first two trials, was to look at the financial records and try to find any connections between any of the subjects or any potential defendants. And so she testified that she reviewed all of the Adelson's bank records, Katie's records, Sigfredo's records, and Luis Rivera's records. And when she meant the Adelsons, she didn't just mean Charlie. She meant Harvey, Donna, Wendy, and Charlie. She also looked into financial records for the Adelson businesses, including the Adelson Institute. Now, part of the financial records that Mary reviewed was she testified that there were 18 different investment accounts. And in fact, she wasn't even able to review all of them. There was 10,000 pages because midway through her analysis, she actually received a promotion, I believe. She went to another position within the government. Now, I'm pretty sure someone probably finished Mary Hull's work. I don't think when she got her job at her new role that they just said, "Oh, no, we won't look at any more of that information." My assumption is someone finished that review of those 10,000 plus pages of investment accounts, and I suspect that we'll get to see some of that information in this trial. Now, Mary also testified that she reviewed credit cards, she reviewed employment records, she reviewed tax filings, DMV reports. She also had access to Charlie's iCloud accounts. So with Mary Hull, I was trying to think of what things, could come in. I mean, it's going to definitely be a lot of information about the Adelson's financial situation, right? And as we've seen somewhat, the Adelson's financial ties, particularly with Charlie, seems to be tied somewhat to the family. So I think that some of that will get in, even if it's not specifically to Charlie. But we'll have to see. Again, we know that the defense is going to be very strong on, opposing anything that might be hearsay. But there were things, when I looked back at the transcript for the 19 trial, which was definitely the longer period that Mary Hull testified for, there were some things that were offered, but ultimately were not allowed into evidence for hearsay objections brought by the defense. So one of the examples was the state tried to get in a text message between Charlie and Sully. And if you remember, Sully is his friend, Charlie's friend, who owned at the time the Echo car repair service, and that was who Charlie would send Katie to, and basically kind of set her up and paid for her, allegedly paid for her car repairs. So they tried to get that evidence in, and on the exhibit list, it just, of course, we don't know what the text said. It just described it as tint and repair. So perhaps maybe Charlie was going to also pay for her to have her car tinted. But there was another text that did not get in that was, it did not say who it was with. It just said it was Charlie. And it just said, I'm going to Key West this weekend. It's about going to Key West. And that did not come in either because Chris DeCoste argued that conversation was not with the defendant, Katie Magbanua, and therefore it could not be admitted as an exception hearsay as admission of a party opponent. So the court ultimately agreed and those texts didn't get in, but I think they're super interesting because they were from the last weekend of June 2014. And if you recall, that was also the weekend that Wendy Adelson went to Gainesville with Jeffrey Lacoste, and that Saturday night they had that big blow up fight and drove back to Tallahassee on Sunday. Her parents had also driven up on Sunday. That Monday, Wendy gets the kids and they all drive back down to South Florida. So, what was going on with that text exchange? Who was it with? And so again, the court agreed that those two exchanges were hearsay because they didn't involve Katie and could not be admitted as a admission of a party opponent. But they might come in at this trial because they're Charlie, right? They're Charlie's texts. So they're admission of a party opponent. The other thing to remember again, too, is that they did allow in some of Charlie's American Express records that did prove that he had made charges in Key West during that weekend. Mary Hull also testified, because remember, she had copies of all these records, that there had also, during that same weekend, had been some smaller charges from Katie as well. So I guess the suggestion is that they were together that weekend.
Did you look in the records and the iCloud for indications that Charles Adelson was providing financial assistance to Catherine Magbanua?
I did.
Based on these particular records for Mr. Adelson's American Express account, did you observe numerous payments to businesses and things of that nature in Key West, Florida?
I did.
And what time frame was this for?
It was the end of June 28, 2014, through the July 4th weekend, I believe.
July what?
July 4th, 2014.
And can you tell the location based off of the
Yes,
records themselves?
yes.
Did Ms. Magbanua have any corresponding payments that she made to businesses in Key West at that time?
Only a couple, but they, as minor as they were, did put her in Key West at the same time.
But it appeared that Mr. Adelson, based on his records, was making the payments during that Key West trip.
Yes.
So I'd love to know more about that. Was that some kind of like, let's secure this hit and let's take Katie to Key West for the weekend and let's get this going? It's the last weekend of June, and then of course we've got July 1, and then 2 weeks later we've got a murder. I don't know. So again, Mary Hull definitely had access to a lot of information on the Adelson's financial situation, and I expect that now that we have at least one Adelson involved, we'll definitely learn more about Charlie's situation. And again, I also think that somebody took over the reins after Mary Hull moved to her new position. I assume that someone finished that work. So I would not think that those 10,000 records have not been reviewed. So anyway, what do you guys think? So these are my first two. Again, they were people I remembered some of the financial testimony. I frankly did not remember Marcia Rodriguez. So that will be interesting to see, but I think she's going to have more of a role in this trial, and definitely Mary Hall is going to have even more of a role in this trial based on her, review and her work as a forensic accountant. And again, thanks so much for joining. If you wouldn't mind, consider liking and subscribing. I'm really trying to grow the channel, and I really appreciate if you're a returning subscriber. Thank you so much for coming back into my community that always leaves such wonderful, thoughtful comments and respectful comments. I'm really appreciative that I have such a great, awesome community.